Hello, I'm Olivia. I'm 31 years old. The night my mother slammed the door on me, Christmas lights were still blinking like nothing was wrong. Red, green, gold. Tiny, cheerful stars glowing across the porch roof, while my world quietly cracked beneath them. I remember staring at those lights because they felt easier to look at than my mother's face. "You can't come in tonight, Olivia." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Some words don't require volume to hurt. Behind her, I could see the living room glowing warm with laughter, wrapping paper scattered across the floor, cinnamon candles burning, everything that was supposed to mean family. But the doorway between us felt like a border I wasn't allowed to cross. "Mom, it's Christmas," I whispered. Not begging, not arguing, just reminding. Because sometimes people forget the obvious when they're angry. Her jaw tightened the way it always did when she'd already made up her mind. "You made your choice," she said. "Now live with it." Choice. That word echoed in my head because I still wasn't sure what choice she meant. The choice to move out last year. The choice to stop sending money when my own rent doubled. Or the choice to finally say no when she asked me to give up my savings for my stepbrother again. With my mother, everything blurred into one unforgivable crime. Behind her shoulder, my stepfather pretended to adjust the Christmas tree. He didn't look at me. He never did during moments like this. My stepbrother Ethan sat on the couch, controller in hand, eyes flicking between the TV and the doorway like I was just another uncomfortable commercial interruption. No one stood up. No one said, "Let her in." Family can be strange that way. People who once held your hand while crossing the street can later watch you stand outside their house and feel nothing at all. "Mom, I just came to drop off your gift," I said softly. I lifted the small paper bag in my hand, the one I'd spent 2 weeks saving for. Inside was the silk scarf she'd pointed at months ago while we walked past a store window. Back then she'd smiled and said, "Maybe next Christmas." I guess this was that Christmas. But smiles have expiration dates. "I don't want it," she replied. The words landed flat. Not angry. Not emotional. Just dismissive. That hurt more. Snowflakes began to fall, tiny and hesitant, like even the sky wasn't sure this moment deserved drama. I swallowed. "Can I at least say hi to Grandpa?" That was when her expression changed. A flicker. A hesitation. And then the door behind her opened wider as laughter spilled out, the sound of my cousin's opening presents. "Grandpa already went home," she said quickly. I blinked. He did. Yes. Another lie. I knew it instantly because Grandpa never left before dessert. Never missed pecan pie. Never skipped the family photo. But calling out lies on Christmas felt crueler than accepting them. So I nodded. A small, quiet nod that said I understand even when I don't. "All right," I murmured. For a moment, neither of us moved. This was the part movies always filled with emotional speeches. Apologies. Confessions. Tears. Real life isn't that generous. Sometimes the most important moments of your life happen in silence. She reached forward. And for one hopeful second, I thought she might hug me. Instead, her hand gripped the edge of the door. "You should go, Olivia." Click. The sound of the lock sliding into place was soft, but final. The porch suddenly felt colder, emptier, smaller. Through the frosted glass, shadows moved, my family continuing Christmas without me. I stood there longer than I should have. Long enough for snow to settle in my hair. Long enough for the neighbors' carols to drift across the street. Long enough to realize that sometimes you don't leave places. You get erased from them. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. Not because anything was funny, but because irony has a strange sense of timing. Earlier that morning, my coworker had asked, excited to go home for Christmas. I'd I'd smiled. Yeah, it's my favorite day. Funny how quickly favorites change. My fingers tightened around the paper bag. For a second, I considered leaving it on the porch. A quiet offering. Proof that despite everything, I still tried. But something inside me resisted. Not anger. Not pride. Just exhaustion. Love shouldn't feel like a one-person performance. So I turned away, the gift still in my hand. Each step down the driveway felt heavier than the last, gravel crunching beneath my boots like tiny reminders that I didn't belong here tonight. Halfway to the gate, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Christmas messages from acquaintances suddenly felt unbearable. But when I glanced at the screen, my chest tightened. Grandpa calling. For a moment, I just stared. Because my mother had said he'd already left. And Grandpa never called during Christmas dinner. I answered. Hi, Grandpa. Ollie, he said warmly, using the nickname no one else remembered. Where are you? I hesitated. On my way home. A pause lingered on the line, the kind only people who truly know you can create. You sound cold, he said gently. Snowflakes melted against my cheek. I'm fine. Another silence. Then softly. Did your mother let you in? That question unraveled something inside me. Because Grandpa didn't ask what happened. He already knew. I exhaled shakily. No. The word floated between us, fragile and heavy at the same time. Grandpa didn't respond right away. I could almost picture him, standing somewhere quiet, brow furrowed, heart aching in that quiet grandfather way that never demands explanations. Well, he finally said, voice steady but tender, stay where you are. What? I'm coming. My pulse quickened. Grandpa, you don't have to. I know, he interrupted softly, but I want to. A lump formed in my throat. Because sometimes the difference between have to and want to is everything. Okay, I whispered. The call ended, leaving only the sound of distant laughter from inside the house and the soft whisper of falling snow. I stood beneath the blinking Christmas lights again. But this time, I wasn't waiting to be let in. I was waiting for someone who chose to come. And I had no idea that within the next 30 minutes, my grandfather would arrive not just with his old pickup truck and familiar smile, but with a secret that would silence my entire family and change my life forever. People always ask when things started going wrong, as if families break in one dramatic moment. They don't. They crack slowly, quietly, like ice forming over water, thin at first, almost beautiful, until one day someone falls through. I wasn't always the outsider. When I was little, it was just Mom and me in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like laundry detergent and burnt toast. We didn't have much, but we had routines. Saturday pancakes, movie nights on the couch, her brushing my hair before school. Back then, I was enough. Everything shifted the year she married Richard. He came with a bigger house, a polished smile, and a son. Ethan was 3 years older than me, confident in the way boys are when the world has never told them no. He walked into our lives like he owned the air inside it. And slowly, he did. At first, Mom tried to keep things balanced. 2 stockings, 2 slices of cake, 2 birthday posts on Facebook. But balance is hard when guilt enters the room. Richard worked long hours and reminded everyone of it. He'd pat Ethan's shoulder proudly and say, "My boy deserves the best." And Mom would nod. Because she wanted to belong in that world. Because she didn't want her new family to feel divided. So when sacrifices needed to be made, I became the easier choice. Olivia understands, she'd say. That sentence followed me everywhere. When Ethan needed a new laptop for school, even though mine barely turned on. Olivia understands. When my college fund quietly shrank to cover unexpected family expenses. Olivia understands. When I picked up extra shifts at 16 so I could pay for my own prom dress. Olivia understands. The funny thing about being the understanding child is that eventually, you realize no one understands you back. Grandpa noticed first. He always did. He wasn't loud about it, didn't cause dramatic scenes at dinner, but his eyes would linger on me a little longer. His hand would squeeze mine under the table when conversations drifted too far in Ethan's direction. "You doing all right, Ollie?" he'd ask softly. I always said yes. Because disappointing your mother hurts less than exposing her. But Grandpa wasn't fooled. When I got accepted into a small state university with partial scholarship, Mom hugged me quickly and said, "That's nice." Ethan got into a private business program months later. There was a banner in the yard. A catered dinner. A Facebook album titled "So Proud of My Son." That was the first time I understood something important. Some children are celebrated. Others are tolerated. I moved out at 22. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just quietly. I found a tiny apartment above a bakery that made the hallway smell like sugar at 5 a.m. I worked full-time at a marketing firm and freelanced at night to keep up with rent. For the first time, every dollar I earned belonged to me. That freedom felt intoxicating. But family ties don't disappear just because you change your address. Mom still called when bills felt tight. Just until next month. For Ethan's tuition. For Richard's car repair. For the mortgage. At first I helped. Because part of me still wanted to be the good daughter. The understanding one. But understanding has limits. The breaking point came 6 months ago. I had finally saved enough for something I'd dreamed about since college, starting my own small digital design studio. Nothing huge, just a modest beginning. Mom found out. And that night she called. "Ethan's business idea needs investment," she said excitedly. "This is big, Olivia. He could make something of himself." And I could, I asked quietly. There was a pause on the line. That's not what I meant. But it was exactly what she meant. She asked me to give him my savings. All of it. "Family supports each other," she said firmly. And for the first time in my life, I said no. Not angrily. Not cruelly. Just clearly. "I've supported for years," I told her. "I need to build something for myself now." Silence. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. "You've changed," she said finally. Maybe I had. Or maybe I just stopped shrinking. After that call, things shifted. Invitations became shorter. Conversations became transactional. I wasn't openly disowned. I was simply reduced. So when Christmas approached, I debated not going. But Grandpa had called personally. "You coming, Ollie?" he'd asked cheerfully. "Wouldn't feel right without you." That was enough. Grandpa had always been my safe place. When I was 8 and forgot my lines in the school play, he'd stood up in the audience and clapped first. When I failed my first driving test, he'd taken me out for milkshakes and said, "Good drivers aren't born confident. They're born stubborn." When I cried in his garage at 17 because Ethan told me I'd never be impressive, Grandpa handed me a wrench and said, "Impressive is overrated. Resilient lasts longer." He taught me how to change a tire, how to fix a leaky sink, how to look someone in the eye without apologizing for existing. And most importantly, he never made me feel second. Which is why standing outside that Christmas door tonight hurt less because of Mom. And more because I thought he had already left. The idea that he'd chosen to go home without saying goodbye felt impossible. But he hadn't left. He had called. And he was coming. I hugged my coat tighter as the snow thickened. Through the window, I could see silhouettes moving. My mother laughing, Ethan lifting a glass. Warmth inside. Cold outside. But something inside me felt different now. Not broken, not angry, just aware. For years, I had fought to stay inside that house emotionally. Tonight, I realized something important. Sometimes rejection is just redirection. Headlights turned onto the street. Slow, familiar, slightly crooked alignment, just like Grandpa's old pickup. My heart skipped. The truck pulled up beside the curb. Engine humming. Driver's door opening with that familiar creak. Grandpa stepped out, coat buttoned unevenly, silver hair catching snowflakes like tiny stars. And when he looked at me standing there under the blinking Christmas lights, his face changed. Not shocked, not confused, just deeply, quietly disappointed. Not in me, but in the house behind me. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me without saying a word. And for the first time that night, I felt warm. "You ready?" he asked gently. "For what?" He smiled in a way I didn't fully understand yet. For a different kind of Christmas. And something in his tone told me this night wasn't over. Not even close. Grandpa smelled like cedarwood and peppermint. It was such a small detail, but as he hugged me beneath those blinking Christmas lights, it anchored me to something real, something steady in a night that felt unstable. He didn't ask questions right away. Didn't demand explanations. He just held me like people do, when they know words would only make things heavier. "You're freezing," he murmured. "I'm okay." "That's never been your best lie, Ollie." I let out a small laugh, the sound shaky but genuine. Grandpa stepped back, studying my face the way mechanics study engines, patiently, carefully, searching for what wasn't working. "She locked the door," he asked quietly. I nodded. A muscle moved in his jaw. Not anger exactly, but something close. "Well," he said after a moment, voice calm but firm, "that's unfortunate." I blinked. "That's it." "Oh no," he replied softly. "That's just the beginning of my thoughts." Despite everything, I smiled. Grandpa had always been like that, gentle, until the moment gentleness stopped being useful. Snow crunched beneath our shoes as we walked toward his truck. Halfway there, I glanced back at the house. The living room window framed a perfect Christmas postcard. Golden lights, laughter, movement, comfort. For a second, the little girl inside me still wanted to run back and knock again. Still wanted to be chosen. Grandpa noticed. "They're missing out," he said simply. That sentence settled somewhere deep inside my chest. Not defensive. Not comforting in an obvious way. Just factual. He opened the passenger door for me. The seat was warm, heater already running. Of course it was. Grandpa prepared for things. For weather. For car trouble. For heartbreak. I climbed in, rubbing my hands together as warmth slowly returned to my fingers. Grandpa settled behind the wheel, but didn't start driving. Instead, he sat there, engine humming softly, windshield wipers brushing away snow in rhythmic arcs. "You know," he began, eyes on the house, "families have patterns." I leaned my head against the seat. "That sounds ominous." He chuckled faintly. Not ominous, just observable. Silence filled the truck, comfortable, thoughtful. "When your mother was young," he continued, "she used to bring home injured birds." I looked over. "What?" "Little sparrows, robins, once even a pigeon missing half its tail." His lips curved. "She couldn't stand the idea of something being unwanted." The irony hit me instantly. I didn't say it. Grandpa didn't need me to. "Life changes people," he said gently. "Responsibilities, fears, the need to prove things." I watched snow gather on the windshield edges. "Do you think she stopped loving me?" The question escaped before I could filter it. Grandpa turned toward me immediately. "No." The certainty in his voice surprised me. "She loves you," he said firmly, But love isn't always expressed with courage. I swallowed. That sounds like an excuse. It's an explanation, he corrected softly. Excuses remove responsibility. Explanations help us understand behavior. That was such a grandpa thing to say. Wise in a way that didn't erase hurt, but made it easier to carry. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. Inside was a peppermint candy. He handed it to me. Emergency morale booster. I laughed quietly. You carry these everywhere. Preparedness is underrated. I unwrapped it, the familiar sweetness spreading across my tongue like childhood. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house behind us glowed. The truck around us hummed. Snow kept falling, indifferent to human drama. Grandpa, I said carefully, Mom told me you'd already left. His brows drew together. She did. I nodded. Oh, that was all he said. But the single syllable carried layers. Disappointment. Understanding. A silent recalibration of assumptions. I was in the den, he explained. Richard asked me to look at the thermostat. I blinked. So, you didn't even say goodbye? Nope, his mouth tightened slightly, which, now that I think about it, is unusual. A realization unfolded between us. Not dramatic. Just quiet and unmistakable. Grandpa had been kept away. Not by accident, but by design. I'm sorry, I murmured. For what? That you had to drive out here on Christmas because of me. Grandpa turned fully in his seat, expression almost offended. Ollie, he said, I didn't come because I had to. The familiar sentence from earlier. I came because I wanted to. Emotion pressed against my throat again. Grandpa reached into the back seat. That's when I noticed it. A worn leather folder. Dark brown. Edges soften with age. The kind of thing people keep important papers in. He rested his hand on it briefly. Not opening it. Just acknowledging its presence. You remember what I used to tell you about timing? He asked. That patience isn't waiting, I recited automatically. It's preparing. He smiled. Smart girl. My eyes lingered on the folder. What's that? Oh, he said casually, though his fingers remained on it. Just something I've been meaning to share. With me. Yes. Tonight. Another small smile. Feels like the right moment. Curiosity flickered. But Grandpa didn't elaborate. Instead, he started the truck. The engine rumbled louder, headlights illuminating the snow-covered street ahead. Where are we going? I asked. Well, he said, pulling away from the curb, original plan was pie. I laughed. Always pie. Traditions matter. The house shrank in the side mirror. Golden lights fading into distance. A strange mix of sadness and relief settled over me as we turned the corner. I didn't know what waited ahead. Didn't know what was inside that leather folder. Didn't know that tonight would redraw invisible lines in my family. But as Grandpa drove through quiet, snow-dusted streets, one thing felt certain. For years, I had tried to earn my place in that house. Tonight, I was being invited somewhere else entirely. And whatever waited inside that folder in the back seat, it wasn't just paperwork. It was history, truth, and a surprise that would soon force my entire family to see me. Very differently. The diner looked exactly the same as it had 10 years ago. Same flickering neon sign. Same foggy windows. Same smell of butter and coffee wrapping around you the moment you walked in. Some places refuse to change. And on nights when everything else feels unstable, that kind of stubborn consistency feels sacred. Grandpa parked outside Martha's diner, snow crunching beneath the tires. You hungry? He asked. I think I'm emotionally starving, I admitted. He chuckled. Pie fixes most existential crises. We stepped inside, bells above the door chiming softly. Warmth hit my face instantly, along with cinnamon, baked apples, and something toasted. It felt like stepping into safety. A waitress with silver curls looked up from behind the counter. Well, if it is Harold and his favorite girl. Grandpa beamed. Evening, Martha. I slid into the booth across from him, hands wrapped around the mug Martha placed in front of me before I even ordered. Hot chocolate. Extra whipped cream. She remembered. Rough night, she asked gently. I smiled faintly. Something like that. She nodded, the quiet understanding of someone who'd watched half the town grow up. Pie's on the house tonight. Grandpa protested. Martha ignored him. Some traditions are non-negotiable. For a few minutes, we just sat there, sipping warmth. Outside, snow blurred the world into soft shapes. Inside, yellow lights painted everything gentle. You know, Grandpa said, stirring his coffee, I used to bring your mother here after school. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Oh, yes. She loved blueberry pie, could eat 2 slices if I didn't intervene. A smile tugged at my lips. It was hard to imagine my mother as a child sometimes. Messy, emotional, imperfect. Parents have a way of rewriting their own origin stories. She was stubborn, Grandpa continued. Sensitive, fiercely protective of the people she loved. That doesn't sound like the woman who locked her daughter out on Christmas. The words slipped out sharper than intended. Grandpa didn't flinch. No, he agreed quietly, it doesn't. Martha arrived with 2 plates, apple pie for me, pecan for Grandpa. Steam curled upward like tiny ghosts. I took a bite. Warm apples, flaky crust, cinnamon. Comfort in edible form. For a moment, neither of us spoke. But silence with Grandpa was never empty. It was thinking space. Do you remember your 10th birthday? He asked suddenly. The science kit. He smiled. You spent 3 hours building a volcano. It exploded wrong. Covered my garage in baking soda lava. I laughed, the memory vivid. Mom had scolded me. Grandpa had taken photos. You cried, he said softly, not because it failed, but because you thought I'd be upset. My chest tightened. You knelt beside me, I recalled, and said experiments that fail teach more. He nodded. That was the day I realized something about you. What? You carry responsibility that isn't yours. I looked down at my pie. The truth of that sentence sat heavier than any confrontation tonight. I just wanted everyone to be happy, I whispered. That's admirable, he said, but dangerous. I met his gaze. Because people who prioritize harmony often become the ones absorbing conflict. Ouch. That landed. Grandpa reached across the table, resting his hand over mine. You were never meant to fund other people's dreams at the cost of your own. Emotion pressed behind my eyes again. I didn't mind helping, I said. I know. And I still don't regret it. He smiled gently. That's your kindness speaking, not your worth. The distinction hit me harder than expected. Worth. Such a quiet word. Such a loud concept. Grandpa, I asked hesitantly, did you know Mom would do this tonight? He considered. I suspected tension. But not this. No, he admitted. I underestimated how far discomfort can push people. Martha refilled our mugs. The diner hummed with low conversation, clinking plates, soft music from an old speaker. Normal life continuing. Meanwhile, mine felt paused between chapters. My eyes drifted to the booth beside us, a family laughing over milkshakes. A little girl leaned against her mother's shoulder. The sight stung. I keep thinking I did something unforgivable, I confessed. Grandpa's expression softened. You grew. That was his answer. Simple, clear, unexpected. Growth threatens systems built on sacrifice, he added. I blinked. That sounds like something from a therapy podcast. He grinned. I listened to NPR. I laughed. God, I love this man. The laughter faded, leaving quiet reflection. My gaze moved toward the window, snow swirling under streetlights. Grandpa, I said slowly, what's in the folder? There it was. The question hovering all night. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he finished his coffee, set the mug down, folded his hands. You ever notice, he began, how families assign roles? The responsible one, the funny one, the problem child. I nodded. You were labeled the understanding one, he said. That wasn't a compliment. No, he agreed. It was convenience. A small ache bloomed in my chest. The folder, he continued, contains something I've been preparing for years. Years. My pulse quickened. Preparing what? A correction. The word hung between us. Intriguing, heavy, vague. Correction of what? He smiled faintly. A narrative. I stared. Grandpa rarely spoke in riddles, which meant whatever this was mattered. A lot. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out cash for the bill despite Martha's protests. Then he stood, ready. To finish Christmas. I hesitated. At your house. He shook his head. No. Relief flickered. Then where? Grandpa picked up the leather folder from the booth beside him. Held it gently, like something fragile but powerful. Back where this night started. My stomach flipped. The house. He nodded. Some conversations shouldn't happen in absence. Anxiety and curiosity collided inside me. You want to go back? I think, he said calmly, it's time everyone hears the same story. Snow continued falling outside. Soft, relentless, quiet. Just like truth sometimes. I grabbed my coat, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't fully name. As we stepped out of the diner into the cold night again, Grandpa's truck waiting under streetlights, I realized something. Earlier tonight, I had stood outside that house feeling unwanted. Nah. I was returning with someone who carried answers. And whatever waited inside that leather folder. It wasn't just going to change my Christmas. It was about to change my family. The drive back felt shorter. Not because the distance had changed, but because anticipation compresses time. Snow tapped softly against the windshield, while Grandpa drove with the same steady calm he brought to everything. Fixing engines, grilling burgers, navigating heartbreak. I watched the streetlights blur past, my reflection faint in the window. An hour ago, I had left that house feeling small. Now I was returning with something I couldn't name yet. Not confidence. Not anger. Something quieter. Certainty, maybe. You nervous? Grandpa asked. A little. That's normal. You're suspiciously calm, I pointed out. He smiled. Perspective is a wonderful sedative. I exhaled a small laugh. The leather folder rested between us on the center console. Close enough to touch. Mysterious enough to resist. What if they don't listen? I asked. Grandpa didn't hesitate. Then they'll still hear. The distinction lingered. Listening is voluntary. Hearing is. We turned onto my mother's street. Rows of decorated houses glowed like postcards, wreaths, inflatable Santas, twinkling lights competing for cheerfulness. But halfway down the block, my chest tightened. The house looked exactly as I'd left it. Lights still blinking. Cars still parked. Life still happening. Except now, I was approaching from the outside with intention. Grandpa parked along the curb again. The engine idled. Neither of us moved right away. You know, he said softly, there's a moment in every story where the protagonist decides whether to walk away or walk back. I glanced at him. And tonight, that choice is yours. The weight of that surprised me. You'd take me home if I asked. Immediately. No hesitation. No persuasion. Just support. I stared at the house. At the door that had closed. At the window where silhouettes still moved. For years, I'd walked on eggshells inside those walls. But tonight wasn't about re-entering as the same person. Tonight was about showing up honestly. I want to go back, I said. Grandpa nodded once. All right. We stepped out into the cold. Snowflakes landed on Grandpa's shoulders, melting slowly against his coat. He held the folder at his side. Not hidden. Not displayed. Just present. Each step up the driveway felt surreal, like revisiting a memory still in progress. I noticed details I'd missed earlier. The welcome mat slightly crooked. The porch plant half frozen. The faint sound of music drifting through the door. Life continuing without interruption. Until now. I stopped at the porch. Grandpa stood beside me, quiet but solid. You don't have to say anything first, he murmured. What if I cry? Then you cry. A breath left me. I raised my hand. Knocked. The sound echoed louder than expected. Inside, movement paused. Footsteps approached. The lock clicked. The door opened. Mom stood there. Her expression shifted through 3 emotions in rapid succession. Surprise. Confusion. Annoyance. Olivia, she said, I thought you left. I did. Her eyes flicked to Grandpa. Everything changed. Dad. Grandpa offered a small, polite smile. Evening, Claire. She blinked, visibly recalibrating. I didn't know you left the den, she said quickly. So I gathered. Silence stretched. The kind filled with unsaid things. Behind her, Richard appeared, his posture stiffening immediately at the sight of us. Ethan hovered near the couch, curiosity outweighing discomfort. What's going on? Mom asked. Her voice wasn't hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. Grandpa spoke gently. We'd like to come in. A simple request. One she couldn't easily refuse without exposing the situation further. Mom hesitated. Just a fraction. Then stepped aside. Of course. The words sounded rehearsed. We crossed the threshold. Warmth wrapped around me instantly. Cinnamon, pine, familiar furniture. It felt like entering a memory. But the energy had shifted. Conversations had stopped. Eyes tracked us. The room sensed disruption. I stood near the entry, unsure where to place myself physically. A strange experience in a house where I once knew every corner. Grandpa removed his coat slowly, deliberately. Apologies for the interruption, he said calmly. Mom forced a small smile. No interruption. Everyone knew that was untrue. Grandpa gestured toward the living room. May we sit? Mom nodded automatically. We moved to the couches. I noticed the empty spot where I used to sit during Christmas gatherings. Tonight, it remained empty. Symbolic in ways no one acknowledged. Grandpa settled into an armchair. I sat beside him. The leather folder rested on his lap now. Visible. Heavy with implication. Mom perched across from us, posture tight. Richard stood behind her like a silent advisor. Ethan lingered by the wall, phone forgotten in his hand. What's this about? Mom asked. Direct. Controlled. Grandpa folded his hands over the folder. I'd like to talk as a family. We are talking, she replied. He met her gaze. Fully. That word landed. A quiet challenge. Mom exhaled slowly. All right. Grandpa nodded. Earlier tonight, he began gently, Olivia came here to celebrate Christmas. Mom's shoulders stiffened. That's between me and my daughter. I understand, he said calmly, but actions ripple beyond intended boundaries. Richard crossed his arms. Harold with respect. Grandpa lifted a hand. Not dismissive. Just pausing. Richard stopped. Grandpa rarely interrupted, which made it meaningful when he did. I'm not here to assign blame, Grandpa continued. I'm here to provide clarity. Mom's eyes flicked to the folder. What clarity? Grandpa's fingers rested on the leather surface. He didn't open it yet. I've spent many years observing this family, he said softly. No accusation. Just truth. And tonight feels like the appropriate moment to share something important. My pulse pounded in my ears. The room felt smaller. Air thicker. Mom's voice tightened. Share what? Grandpa looked around the room, at each of us, with calm steadiness. Then back at her. A decision. Silence swallowed the space between breaths. My heart raced, because whatever was inside that folder was no longer a mystery, waiting quietly in the background. It was about to step into the center of the room. Grandpa's hand moved. Slowly. Toward the clasp. And every person in that living room leaned into the same invisible question. What was he about to reveal? The room felt too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind that hums beneath your skin, vibrating with anticipation. Grandpa's fingers rested on the clasp of the leather folder while everyone watched. Mom perched forward on the couch, Richard rigid behind her, Ethan standing unusually still. And me. I could hear my own heartbeat. Slow, loud, relentless. Grandpa didn't rush. He never rushed important things. The clasp clicked open with a soft metallic sound that somehow echoed through the entire living room. Inside were several neatly organized documents and one large cream envelope. Thick. Official. Unmistakable. Grandpa lifted the envelope first. My stomach tightened. Dad, Mom said carefully, what is this? Grandpa glanced at her, expression calm but firm. This, he said, is something I finalized last month. He turned the envelope over and slid out a single document. Paper rustled. A small sound with enormous weight. I leaned forward slightly, curiosity pulling me closer despite the anxiety buzzing in my chest. Grandpa adjusted his glasses. Olivia, he said gently, I want you to hear this first. My throat went dry. Okay. He held the paper, but looked directly at me instead of reading immediately. For years, he began, I've watched you give without expectation of return. A familiar ache stirred. You supported this family financially, emotionally, quietly, often invisibly. No one spoke. Even Richard didn't interrupt. Grandpa continued. You did it not because you were asked loudly, but because you were asked subtly, through need, through pressure, through love. Mom shifted. Grandpa didn't look away. And while generosity is admirable, he said, imbalance is not. Silence deepened. Grandpa finally glanced down at the paper. Last month, I restructured my investment portfolio and liquidated several long-held assets. The words sounded formal, almost clinical, but the air changed instantly. Mom's brows knit together. Richard straightened. Ethan blinked. Grandpa's voice remained steady. As part of that process, I created a personal gift allocation. He paused, then spoke clearly. I transferred $250,000 into a dedicated account. The number landed like a dropped glass. $250,000. No one moved. No one breathed. I felt like I'd misheard. Grandpa lifted his eyes to mine. That account, he said softly, is in your name, Olivia. The world tilted. What? Mom's voice overlapped mine. What? Richard stepped forward. Harold. Grandpa raised a hand gently. Not aggressive, but immovable. This is not an impulsive decision, he said. It is documented, finalized, and complete. My ears rang. $250,000. The number replayed in my head, like an echo bouncing off walls. That's not necessary, I stammered. Grandpa smiled faintly. Necessary is subjective. Emotions surged upward. Disbelief, gratitude, confusion, fear. I can't take that, I whispered. You can, he replied gently, and you will. Tears blurred my vision. Why? It came out small. Honest. Childlike. Grandpa's expression softened in a way that made my chest ache. Because I believe in investing where growth already exists. The simplicity of that answer shattered something inside me. Mom's composure cracked. Dad, this is extremely unfair. The words cut through the moment like a blade. I flinched. Grandpa turned toward her. Unfair. Yes, she said, voice tightening. You can't just give Olivia that kind of money without discussing it with the family. Grandpa's gaze remained calm. It is my asset. That's not the point. Then clarify the point, he said gently. Mom faltered. Richard stepped in. Harold, Ethan is also building something. If you're making financial gifts. This is not a distribution strategy, Grandpa replied. It is a personal decision. Silence fell again. Heavy. Charged. Ethan shifted awkwardly. Mom's eyes moved between Grandpa and me, disbelief morphing into something more complicated. But why Olivia? She asked quietly. The question hung there. Not angry now. Just raw. Grandpa didn't hesitate. Because she spent years giving without safety nets. My throat tightened. Because she was expected to understand rather than be understood. Mom's eyes glistened. Because, Grandpa finished softly, she built resilience without applause. No one spoke. The truth didn't shout. It settled. Slowly. Unavoidably. I wiped my cheeks. I don't want this to cause problems, I said quietly. Grandpa reached over, squeezing my hand. Money doesn't create fractures, he murmured. It reveals them. That sentence echoed through the room like a quiet thunderclap. Mom exhaled shakily. This feels like punishment. Grandpa shook his head. No, Claire, it is recognition. The distinction lingered. Powerful. Uncomfortable. Undeniable. I stared at the document in Grandpa's hands. Official lettering, signatures, numbers that felt unreal. $250,000. Not a lottery win. Not a reward. A vote of confidence. And somehow, that felt heavier. Grandpa carefully placed the document back into the envelope. This gift has no conditions, he said. No expectations, no repayment. My chest tightened. It is simply, he finished, support. Support. The word I'd spent years offering others. Now sitting in front of me like something unfamiliar. The room remained suspended in silence, each person processing their own version of this moment. But beneath the shock, beneath the tension, beneath the unspoken comparisons, another realization unfolded quietly inside me. Tonight wasn't just about money. It was about visibility. For years, I had felt unseen in this family. And now, there was no way to ignore me. Not after this. Not after him. Not after the envelope that still rested between Grandpa's hands, holding not just $250,000, but a truth my family could no longer pretend not to see. Silence after revelation feels different. It's not empty. It's crowded. Thoughts collide. Emotions scramble for order. People search for the right reaction or the least revealing one. And in that living room, silence stretched like glass about to crack. Mom was the first to move. She stood slowly, arms folding across her chest as if physically holding herself together. "I don't understand," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried confusion sharpened by something deeper. Grandpa didn't respond immediately. Because sometimes understanding isn't something you can hand someone. They have to arrive at it. "You gave Olivia $250,000, Mom continued, "without telling me." "That is correct. And you expect everyone to just accept that." Grandpa tilted his head slightly. "I expect everyone to process it honestly." Mom let out a humorless laugh. "That's convenient." The air shifted again. Richard cleared his throat. "Harold, nobody is questioning your right to spend your money, but optics matter." Optics? The word made my stomach twist. As if my worth were a public relations issue. Grandpa's expression remained calm. "What optics concern you?" Richard hesitated. Ethan spoke instead. "It looks like favoritism." There it was. Direct. Unfiltered. I felt heat rise in my chest, but Grandpa answered before I could. "Favoritism implies unequal affection," he said. "This is unequal circumstance." Ethan frowned. "That sounds like semantics." "It's context," Grandpa corrected gently. Mom paced a few steps, heels clicking softly against the floor. "You could have helped Ethan's business," she said. "You know he's trying to build something." I looked down. That familiar narrative resurfacing. Grandpa's voice stayed even. "And Olivia is not." Mom stopped. "That's different." "How?" The question lingered unanswered. Because sometimes the hardest questions are simple ones. Mom's gaze shifted toward me. "You never told me you needed help." The statement hit like a quiet accusation. "I didn't think I was allowed to," I replied softly. The words surprised even me. But once spoken, they felt undeniable. Mom blinked. "What does that mean?" I inhaled slowly, fingers lacing together to stop their trembling. "It means every time money came up, it was about Ethan." Silence. Not hostile. Just exposed. "I didn't want to compete for support," I added, "so I stopped asking." Mom's face tightened. "That's not fair." I swallowed. It wasn't meant to be. Grandpa watched quietly, not intervening, just present. Ethan shifted his weight. "I never asked you to give up anything," he said. His tone wasn't defensive, just uncertain. "I know," I replied. "And I didn't take your money." "No," I agreed softly, but the expectation was always there. That landed harder than blame. Because expectations operate invisibly. Richard stepped forward. "This conversation is becoming unnecessarily emotional." Grandpa chuckled faintly. "Families are emotional ecosystems." Richard didn't respond. Mom rubbed her temples. I feel blindsided." Grandpa's expression softened. "That is understandable." "Is it?" she asked. "Yes," he said gently, "but discomfort doesn't invalidate decisions." Mom sank onto the couch again, shoulders heavy. The confident matriarch posture from earlier was gone. In its place sat someone trying to reconcile conflicting realities. "I tried to be fair," she murmured. It wasn't a defense. It was a confession. Grandpa leaned forward slightly. "I know you did." Mom's eyes glistened. But somewhere along the way, fairness became efficiency. She looked up. "What does that mean?" It became easier to ask Olivia to understand than to redistribute expectations. The truth settled slowly, like snow accumulating unnoticed until everything is covered. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. So what now? He asked quietly. A practical question, but loaded. Grandpa rested his hands on his knees. Now nothing changes externally. Everyone looked confused. You still celebrate holidays, you still talk, you still disagree, he continued. But internally, awareness shifts. Mom exhaled shakily. That sounds poetic but not helpful. Grandpa smiled. Awareness is the most helpful catalyst humans have. I watched them, this family dynamic unfolding like a map I was finally allowed to read. For years, I had felt like the problem. Tonight, I realized I had simply been the quiet participant in a larger pattern. Ethan looked at me. Are you happy about this? The question caught me off guard. I considered. I'm grateful, I said honestly. But, I smiled faintly. But I wish it didn't take money for this conversation to happen. The room went still. Because that was the truth beneath everything. This wasn't about $250,000. It was about visibility. Mom wiped her cheek quickly, almost embarrassed. I never wanted you to feel second, she whispered. Emotion tightened my chest. I know, I said. And I meant it. Intent and impact rarely match perfectly. Grandpa watched us with quiet pride. Not because conflict existed, but because honesty finally did. Ethan cleared his throat. So, what are you going to do with it? The question felt lighter, curious rather than charged. I looked at the envelope. The number inside still surreal. I don't know yet, I admitted. Grandpa smiled. That's the beauty of autonomy. Autonomy. A word that felt like fresh air. Mom studied me carefully. Did you really come tonight just to give me a gift? I nodded. Her eyes dropped to my still-clutched paper bag. Guilt flickered across her face. You can give it now, she said softly. The invitation carried more than literal meaning. I handed her the bag. She opened it slowly, pulling out the silk scarf. Recognition dawned instantly. You remembered, she whispered. Of course. Her lips trembled. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words. Simple. Heavy. Long overdue. And suddenly, the tension in the room softened, not disappearing, but shifting into something more human. Imperfect. Repairable. Real. Grandpa leaned back, satisfied but quiet. Because this moment wasn't about his envelope anymore. It was about what the envelope revealed. And as my mother held the scarf, eyes shining under Christmas lights, I realized something. The biggest surprise tonight wasn't the money. It was the conversation that followed. But Grandpa wasn't finished yet. Because resting inside that leather folder was more than a single document. And the next page was about to change the future of this family in a way none of us expected. The room felt different now. Not calm, but open. Like windows had been cracked after years of stale air. Mom still held the silk scarf in her lap, fingers brushing the fabric as if it were something fragile, something she didn't quite deserve but didn't want to let go of. Ethan leaned against the wall, thoughtful rather than defensive. Richard had stopped speaking altogether. And Grandpa quietly reached for the leather folder again. I noticed immediately. So did everyone else. You said there was more, Mom murmured. Grandpa nodded. Yes. The word carried weight. Not suspense for drama's sake, but the quiet gravity of unfinished truth. He slid out another document. This one thicker. Multiple pages. Tabs. Signatures. Legal formatting unmistakable. My pulse quickened again. Dad, Mom said cautiously. Grandpa looked around the room, his expression gentle but resolute. For years, I've believed inheritance should be less about assets and more about impact. No one interrupted. When I began updating my estate plan last year, he continued, I asked myself a question. He paused. What does legacy actually mean? Snow tapped softly against the windows, the world outside continuing while ours narrowed to his words. Is it money? He asked. Silence. Property, investments, collections. He shook his head faintly. Legacy is continuity of values. The statement settled deeply. Grandpa adjusted his glasses and placed the document on the coffee table so everyone could see the heading. Last will and testament amendment. Mom inhaled sharply. Ethan straightened. I froze. I want to be very clear, Grandpa said gently. This is not a surprise meant to shock. It is a decision meant to reflect. Mom's voice trembled. What did you do? Grandpa smiled softly. I structured my estate into 3 equal categories. The room held its breath. Experiences, security, contribution. No one spoke. Experiences, he said, are memories I've already shared with each of you. Trips, holidays, lessons, time. A quiet warmth moved through the room. Security, he continued, includes assets designated to ensure stability for my children. Mom's shoulders eased slightly. But Grandpa wasn't finished. And contribution, he said, represents the portion meant to continue forward growth. My heart pounded. Grandpa's eyes met mine. That portion, he said softly, is entrusted to Olivia. The air shifted again. Not explosive, but profound. It does not belong to her alone, he clarified. It belongs to what she builds with it. Mom blinked rapidly. What does that mean? It means, Grandpa said, that after my lifetime, a fund will exist under Olivia's direction dedicated to supporting first-generation entrepreneurs in our community. I stared at him, speechless. Ethan's brows lifted. Richard looked genuinely surprised. Mom whispered, a foundation. Grandpa nodded. Small at first, but intentional. Emotion surged through me, disbelief layered with awe. You trust me with that, I whispered. Grandpa's smile was immediate. I trust your perspective. Tears blurred my vision. But why me? The question felt different this time. Less insecurity. More wonder. Grandpa leaned forward, voice warm and steady. Because you understand what it feels like to pursue something without a safety net. My chest tightened. Because you know how quiet resilience looks. Tears spilled freely now. And because, he finished gently, you give without spectacle. Silence filled the room. Not awkward. Reverent. Mom wiped her eyes. I didn't realize, she whispered. Grandpa reached for her hand. That's all right. Ethan exhaled slowly. That's actually really cool. I laughed through tears. The tension dissolved into something unexpected. Pride. Shared pride. Not competitive. Not comparative. Just collective. Richard nodded thoughtfully. That's meaningful, Harold. Grandpa smiled. That was the goal. I stared at the document on the table. My name printed in legal ink. Not as beneficiary, but as steward. The distinction felt enormous. I don't know if I'm ready, I admitted. Grandpa squeezed my hand. Readiness follows responsibility more often than the reverse. That sounded exactly like something he'd say. Mom stood and walked toward me slowly. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just intentional. She stopped in front of me. I'm proud of you, she said. 3 words I hadn't realized I'd spent years waiting to hear. My throat tightened. Thank you. She hesitated, then pulled me into a hug. Not the quick, polite kind. A real one. Warm. Trembling. Human. I'm sorry for tonight, she whispered. I hugged her back. I know. and for the first time in a long time. That felt enough. Grandpa watched us, eyes shining quietly. The Christmas tree lights blinked behind him, red, green, gold, just as they had when the door closed earlier. But now they felt different. Because context changes everything. Earlier tonight, I stood outside this house feeling excluded. Now I stood inside it feeling seen. Not because of $250,000. Not because of legal documents. But because truth had been spoken. Conversations had happened. Patterns had been acknowledged. Grandpa gathered the papers carefully, returning them to the folder. The moment wasn't about paperwork anymore. It was about what the paperwork represented. Continuity. Recognition. Trust. Ethan stretched. So, does this mean dessert round 2? Everyone laughed softly. The tension finally releasing. Mom wiped her cheeks, smiling. There's still pie. Grandpa stood, satisfied. Now that, he said, sounds like Christmas. Later that night, as laughter slowly returned and plates clinked, and the house filled again with warmth. I stepped onto the porch alone for a moment. Snow still fell. Soft, quiet, unbothered. I looked at the door. The same door that had closed on me hours ago. And I realized something important. The door hadn't defined my worth. It had revealed my direction. Behind me, voices called my name. Inside waited imperfect people trying again. Inside waited conversations still unfolding. Inside waited family, complicated, flawed, evolving. I smiled and stepped back in, closing the door gently behind me. Not as someone asking to belong, but as someone who already did. And somewhere in the living room, Grandpa sat beneath blinking lights, leather folder resting beside him. Holding documents worth hundreds of thousands, but carrying something far more valuable. A reminder that the greatest inheritance we receive is the belief someone places in who we can become. And that Christmas, the door that closed on me became the one I finally walked through. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. And if you love emotional, powerful stories like this, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next one. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.